Picture this scenario. You're the person everyone calls when they need help. The one who volunteers at the local shelter, listens to friends' problems at 2 a.m., and gives up lunch breaks to help struggling colleagues. You're what most people would call a good person. But here's what no one tells you about goodness. It can become your greatest vulnerability. Welcome to one of the most overlooked paradoxes of human behavior, the paradox of being a good person. Today, we're diving deep into a psychological mystery that affects millions worldwide, yet rarely gets the attention it deserves. I'm about to show you how goodness, when taken to extremes or wielded without wisdom, doesn't just fail to create the better world we hope for. It can actually enable the very behaviors it seeks to combat. Have you ever felt punished for being good? Have you wondered why being kind sometimes seems to invite cruelty? If so, you're not alone, and you're not imagining things. There's a deep psychological reality at work here, and understanding it might change how you approach goodness forever. The very qualities that make you admirable, your empathy, your willingness to sacrifice, your desire to see the best in others, can be turned into weapons against you by those who recognize and exploit these patterns. Let's start by understanding what we're really talking about. The paradox of being a good person isn't simply about good people having bad things happen to them. That's just life's randomness. This paradox runs much deeper. At its core, this paradox reveals itself in several interconnected ways. First, there's the exploitation loop. Good people tend to be more trusting, more giving, and more willing to assume positive intent in others. These qualities create predictable behavioral patterns that can be identified and exploited. Think of it like this. If you're a pickpocket, you don't target the suspicious, paranoid person clutching their belongings. You target the relaxed, trusting individual who's focused on helping someone with directions. The very openness that makes someone wonderful to be around also makes them an easier target. But the paradox goes beyond simple exploitation. There's also what philosophers call moral burden transfer. When you're known as the good person in any group, whether family, workplace, or friend circle, people unconsciously transfer moral responsibilities to you. They become less likely to step up themselves because they know you will. Consider the workplace where one person always stays late to help struggling colleagues. What happens over time? That person becomes the unofficial team savior, while others become comfortable underperforming because they know the good person will pick up the slack. The good person's dedication actually enables a system where others can be less dedicated. Perhaps the most profound aspect is what we might call goodness as a vulnerability signal. In evolutionary psychology, there's a concept called honest signaling. Behaviors that demonstrate positive traits but come at a cost. Genuine goodness is often an honest signal because it requires sacrifice. However, in a world where not everyone operates with the same moral framework, these signals can become vulnerability markers. Your willingness to help signals that you have resources to spare, and a psychology that prioritizes others' needs. While this attracts genuine people, it also attracts those who see opportunities for exploitation. To truly understand this paradox, we need to examine the psychological mechanisms that make it possible. Why are good people so susceptible to exploitation? Research in moral psychology has identified moral sensitivity, the degree to which individuals notice and respond to moral issues. People with high moral sensitivity are more likely to perceive when something is wrong, feel personally responsible for addressing it, and take action even when costly. This comes with psychological vulnerabilities. First, there's the moral licensing trap. When people see themselves as good, they sometimes unconsciously give themselves permission to be less vigilant about boundaries. They think, I'm a good person, so my instincts about people must be right, leading them to ignore red flags. Second, there's empathy hijacking. Good people tend to have higher empathy levels, making them more susceptible to emotional manipulation. When someone presents themselves as wounded or desperate, The empathetic person's natural response is to help, often before evaluating whether that help is truly needed. Research shows that individuals with certain personality disorders, particularly those on the narcissistic and antisocial spectrum, develop sophisticated skills at identifying and targeting highly empathetic individuals. They learn to recognize behavioral patterns that indicate someone with high moral sensitivity. Think of it as a predator-prey relationship in the moral realm. Just as biological predators evolve to identify vulnerable herd members, psychological predators develop abilities to identify those whose goodness makes them susceptible to manipulation. These individuals often employ virtue signaling mimicry. They learn to present themselves as equally or more moral and virtuous to gain trust. They tell stories of charitable acts, express concern for the same causes, and present themselves as kindred spirits in pursuing goodness. This creates a devastating psychological trap. The good person, encountering what appears to be another good person, drops their guard. They're more willing to trust, give, and make excuses when things don't add up. The exploitation often follows predictable patterns, starting with small requests: borrowing money, asking favors, seeking emotional support. Each successful interaction creates commitment escalation. Having said yes to small requests, it becomes psychologically harder to say no to larger ones. One of the most challenging aspects is what we call the enablement trap, the way good intentions can perpetuate the very problems they're trying to solve. Imagine a parent who loves their child and wants to protect them from harsh realities. When the child makes mistakes, the parent fixes the consequences. When facing challenges, the parent removes obstacles. When acting irresponsibly, the parent covers for them. The parent's intentions are genuinely good. They want to spare their child pain and ensure success. But what actually happens? The child never learns to handle consequences, never develops resilience, and never gains skills needed to navigate challenges independently. The parent's goodness, expressed through protection, actually harms the child's development. This pattern repeats across countless scenarios. The manager who always covers for underperforming employees creates a workplace where accountability is absent. The friend who always listens but never challenges self-destructive choices becomes complicit in their friend's stagnation. The psychological mechanism underlying this trap is complex. When we encounter someone struggling, our natural empathetic response is to alleviate immediate pain. However, this often conflicts with tough love, allowing people to experience natural consequences so they can learn and grow. The good person faces a moral dilemma. Should they alleviate immediate suffering, even if doing so might prevent long-term growth? Should they help someone avoid consequences, even if those consequences might teach important lessons? People who consistently have their problems solved by others often develop learned helplessness in some areas, while becoming sophisticated at generating crises that require rescue. They learn that being in distress is an effective way to get needs met. This creates pathological homeostasis, a stable but unhealthy pattern where one person's role as rescuer and another's as victim become mutually reinforcing. The rescuer feels needed and virtuous, while the victim gets problems solved without developing capabilities. Consider the phenomenon in organizations where conscientious employees gradually take on more responsibilities. They see tasks needing completion, problems requiring solutions, and their natural inclination is to step up. Over time, these employees find themselves carrying disproportionate workloads, while less conscientious colleagues maintain lighter responsibilities with the same recognition. This creates the prison of competence. The better you are at something, the more you're expected to do it, until you're trapped in a role that may not align with your interests or well-being. Your goodness becomes a cage. Understanding this paradox requires examining the complex social dynamics that emerge when good people interact with the broader world. Society has a complicated relationship with goodness. We claim to value it highly, yet often punish it in subtle but significant ways. There's the tall poppy syndrome as applied to moral behavior. Just as societies sometimes cut down those who achieve too much success, they create pressure against those who demonstrate too much moral excellence. First, there's moral comparison threats. When someone consistently acts with high moral standards, their behavior creates contrast that makes others uncomfortable about their own choices. This isn't necessarily conscious. Most people don't wake up thinking they need to tear down the good person. Instead, it's a subtle psychological response to feeling judged, even when no judgment is intended. Think about workplace dynamics when one person always volunteers for charity drives, helps colleagues, goes above and beyond. Other employees may feel pressure to match this behavior or feel implicitly criticized for their modest contributions. Rather than raising their own behavior, they often respond by finding reasons to criticize the good person's actions. You'll hear comments like, "They're just showing off," or "They must not have a life," or "They're making the rest of us look bad." These responses serve a psychological function. They allow people to dismiss the good person's behavior as inauthentic, relieving pressure to examine their own choices. This creates moral dissonance reduction. When faced with someone whose behavior challenges our moral comfort zone, we can raise our own standards, accept that some people are more moral, or find ways to diminish their moral standing. The third option is often psychologically easier. The good person faces a painful dilemma. They can continue acting according to their values and risk social isolation, or dial back their goodness to fit in better. Many choose the latter, leading to moral compression, social pressure that pushes exceptional moral behavior toward the average. Society simultaneously celebrates and punishes moral heroes. We love stories of people who sacrifice everything for principles, who stand up for what's right regardless of cost. We make movies about them, teach children to admire them, hold them up as examples of humanity's best. Yet when we encounter such people in real life, our response is often ambivalent. Their presence makes us uncomfortable because they force us to confront gaps between our espoused values and actual behavior. They represent a mirror showing not who we are, but who we claim we want to be. This creates the saint's dilemma. The more someone embodies genuine moral excellence, the more they become isolated from ordinary social interactions. People put them on pedestals, making them symbols rather than treating them as human beings. To fully grasp this paradox, we must examine philosophical frameworks that have grappled with these questions for millennia. The tension between moral idealism and practical reality has been a central concern since ancient times. The ancient Greeks identified the problem of moral motivation. Why do people choose to be good, especially when goodness often comes at personal cost? If being good sometimes makes us worse off practically, what rational justification exists for choosing goodness? Plato argued that virtue is its own reward, that good people live harmonious, fulfilling lives, regardless of external consequences. But this view faces challenges from practical experience. Many genuinely good people report feeling frustrated, exhausted, and taken advantage of. Aristotle provided a more nuanced view through practical wisdom or phronesis. He argued that true virtue requires not just good intentions, but wisdom to know when, how, and to what degree to express those intentions. A person who gives away all their money to charity might have good intentions, but if this leaves their family in poverty, Aristotle would question whether this represents genuine virtue. This Aristotelian insight points toward a key philosophical dimension: the relationship between intention and outcome. Good people typically focus on intentions. They want to help, reduce suffering, make the world better. But the paradox emerges when good intentions produce harmful outcomes. Consequentialism judges actions based on results rather than intentions. From this perspective, an action intended to be good but producing bad results is actually bad, regardless of motivation. This creates a challenging landscape for good people. They must predict and take responsibility for complex downstream effects. But this leads to the paralysis of analysis problem. If we're required to fully understand all possible consequences before acting, we might never act at all. Deontological ethics, developed by Kant, offers a different approach. Kant argued that moral actions are those performed from duty to universal principles, regardless of consequences. From this perspective, the good person who is taken advantage of has still acted morally. But Kant's framework creates its own version of the paradox. His categorical imperative states we should act only according to principles we could will to be universal laws. This creates a problem. If everyone acted with unlimited helpfulness, would society function better or create a world of enablers and takers? Virtue ethics focuses not on specific actions or consequences, but on character traits leading to human flourishing. From this perspective, the problem isn't goodness itself, but goodness without wisdom, courage, or self-respect. The person who helps everyone may be expressing compassion, but they may lack wisdom to discern when help is genuinely needed versus enabling. They may lack courage to set boundaries or self-respect to recognize their own legitimate needs. This suggests the goodness paradox emerges not from virtue per se, but from incomplete virtue, good intentions without the full complement of character traits needed to express those intentions wisely. Eastern philosophical traditions offer additional perspectives. Buddhism emphasizes skillful means, choosing actions that are not just well-intentioned, but genuinely helpful given specific circumstances. Buddhist compassion requires wisdom about what will reduce suffering long-term, even if it increases discomfort short-term. Taoism offers Wu Wei, acting in accordance with natural flows rather than forcing outcomes. From this perspective, good people's problems often arise from trying too hard to control and fix everything, rather than trusting natural processes of growth that require people to face their own challenges. Understanding philosophical foundations is crucial, but we need practical insights into psychological mechanisms that make good people vulnerable and strategies they can employ for protection while maintaining moral commitments. Let's examine cognitive biases of goodness, systematic thinking errors that good people are particularly prone to making. These are character flaws. They're natural byproducts of psychological traits that make someone good. The first major bias is the fundamental attribution error applied to moral situations. When good people encounter someone behaving badly, they tend to attribute that behavior to circumstances rather than character. They must be going through a hard time, or they probably don't realize how their behavior affects others. This bias stems from natural empathy and the tendency to give others the benefit of the doubt. In many situations, this is valuable. However, it becomes problematic when dealing with individuals who consistently behave badly due to stable character traits or deliberate choices rather than circumstances. The second major bias is projection of moral reasoning. Good people assume others share their basic moral framework and will respond to moral arguments similarly. They believe that if they can explain why their request is reasonable or boundary is important, the other person will naturally adjust their behavior. This assumption works with people who share similar moral commitments, but it fails dramatically with individuals who have different moral frameworks or are willing to exploit others' commitments for personal gain. A third crucial bias is sunk cost fallacy in relationships. Once good people have invested time, energy, or emotional resources in helping someone, they become psychologically committed to that investment. Even when clear evidence emerges that their help isn't working or is being exploited, they find it difficult to walk away. Understanding these biases is the first step in developing effective psychological defense strategies. But defenses for good people can't simply involve becoming cynical or selfish. That would solve the paradox by eliminating goodness. The first key strategy is trust but verify. This maintains the natural inclination to give others the benefit of the doubt while adding systematic checks to ensure trust is warranted. Instead of trusting indefinitely, based on intentions or potential, trust becomes something earned through consistent behavior over time. This doesn't mean becoming suspicious or paranoid. It means creating reasonable standards for evaluating whether someone is genuinely trying to improve versus simply seeking to exploit help. It means paying attention to patterns rather than isolated incidents. A second crucial strategy is bounded goodness, recognizing that even good people have finite resources and that preserving those resources is itself a moral imperative. This involves setting clear limits on how much time, energy, and resources can be devoted to helping any particular person or cause. Bounded goodness also involves strategic goodness, making conscious decisions about where to direct help based on likelihood of positive impact, rather than simply responding to whoever asks most persistently. A third essential strategy involves developing emotional regulation skills, specifically tailored to challenges good people face. This includes learning to tolerate discomfort that comes with setting boundaries, saying no, or allowing others to experience natural consequences of their actions. Many good people avoid these necessary actions not because they don't understand their importance intellectually, but because they find the emotional experience of disappointing others unbearable. A fourth strategy involves building moral communities, surrounding yourself with people who share similar values and can provide perspective on moral dilemmas. Good people often feel isolated in their moral commitments, especially when facing social pressure to compromise standards. Finally, good people need meta-moral awareness, the ability to think about their own moral thinking. This involves regularly examining motivations, questioning whether actions are truly helping or enabling, and being honest about outcomes of moral choices. Let me share several detailed case studies that illustrate how this paradox plays out in real situations. Case Study 1. The workplace savior meets Sarah, a marketing manager who's naturally conscientious and empathetic. When colleagues struggle with projects, she offers help. When deadlines are tight, she stays late. When team members have personal problems, she provides support. Over time, Sarah's reputation as someone who gets things done grows. Managers assign her challenging projects because they know she'll succeed. Colleagues come to her first when they need help because they know she'll say yes. What Sarah doesn't realize is that her helpfulness is creating systemic problems. Her colleague Marcus has learned he can take on more projects than he can handle because Sarah will step in when he falls behind. Her manager assigns unrealistic deadlines because Sarah will find a way to meet them. Meanwhile, Sarah works increasingly long hours, feels increasingly resentful, and struggles to advance because she's spending so much time helping others with their careers. When she tries to set boundaries, she faces pushback. Sarah is caught in the classic enablement trap. Her goodness has created a system where others are incentivized to be less capable and responsible, but extracting herself feels like betraying her values. The solution involves several strategic steps. Sarah needs to recognize that her current approach isn't helping colleagues develop capabilities, it's preventing development. She needs to shift from solving people's problems to helping them develop skills to solve their own problems. Most importantly, Sarah needs to reframe her understanding of helpfulness. True helpfulness sometimes requires allowing people to struggle so they can grow. Case Study 2. The Family Rescuer. Consider David, whose younger brother Kevin has struggled with addiction and financial instability for years. David has lent thousands of dollars, allowed Kevin to stay in his apartment during temporary rough patches, helped him find jobs, and covered rent when Kevin couldn't pay. David's intentions are genuinely loving. He believes Kevin just needs someone to believe in him and provide a safety net. However, David's help has inadvertently enabled Kevin's irresponsible behavior. Every time Kevin faces serious consequences, David steps in to prevent them. The result is that Kevin has never had to fully confront the the reality of his situation. He's learned that no matter how badly he manages his life, David will rescue him. This reduces his motivation to make difficult changes. Meanwhile, David's own life suffers. His savings are depleted, his relationships are strained, and he experiences chronic stress from trying to manage both his own life and his brother's problems. The solution requires David to accept that truly helping Kevin means allowing him to experience the full consequences of his choices. This doesn't mean stopping loving Kevin, but it means setting clear boundaries and sticking to them even when Kevin faces serious difficulties. Case Study 3. A Friendship Imbalance. Consider the friendship between Alex and Jordan. Alex is naturally empathetic and supportive, always available when Jordan needs to talk through problems or needs emotional support. Jordan is charming and fun, but the friendship has become one-sided. Jordan regularly calls Alex late at night for lengthy conversations about their problems, but rarely asks how Alex is doing. When Alex tries to share struggles, Jordan quickly redirects the conversation. Jordan frequently asks for favors, but rarely offers help in return. Alex feels increasingly drained, but struggles to address the imbalance because they genuinely care about Jordan and don't want to seem selfish. A worry that setting boundaries might damage the friendship. This illustrates how good people can become trapped in relationships that exploit their natural generosity. The solution requires Alex to recognize that friendship without reciprocity isn't actually healthy for either party. These case studies reveal common patterns in how the goodness paradox manifests. In each case, the good person's natural inclinations create vulnerabilities that others exploit. The solutions require acting in ways that feel contrary to their nature, setting boundaries, allowing others to struggle, prioritizing their own needs. One of the most crucial skills for navigating the goodness paradox is learning to set and maintain healthy boundaries. For many good people, boundaries feel selfish or contrary to their values. However, understanding boundaries as wisdom rather than selfishness is essential for sustainable goodness. A boundary is simply a limit you set on what you're willing to accept, do, or give in any situation. Boundaries aren't walls that shut people out. They're gates that allow you to control what comes in and out of your life. The difficulty good people have with boundaries stems from several factors. First, there's boundary guilt, the feeling that setting limits is somehow selfish. This guilt is often reinforced by people who benefit from the absence of boundaries. Second, many good people have internalized messages that equate goodness with unlimited self-sacrifice. They've learned that putting their own needs first is selfish, that saying no is mean, and that good people should always be willing to help regardless of personal cost. Third, good people struggle with boundaries because they can imagine how their limits might cause others pain. Their natural empathy makes them acutely aware of how their no will affect others. However, this understanding of boundaries is fundamentally flawed. Healthy boundaries aren't about being selfish. They're about being sustainable. They're not about hurting others. They're about creating conditions where you can help others effectively over the long term. Consider the airline safety instruction. Put on your own oxygen mask before assisting others. This isn't selfish. It's practical wisdom. If you pass out from lack of oxygen while trying to help someone else, you become an additional problem rather than part of the solution. Boundaries serve several crucial functions that actually enhance rather than diminish your ability to be good. First, they preserve your resources so you can continue helping over time rather than burning out quickly. Second, they ensure your help goes to situations where it can be most effective. Third, they model healthy behavior for others. Perhaps most importantly, boundaries often help the people you're trying to help more than unlimited availability does. When you consistently rescue someone from consequences, you prevent them from learning and growing. Let's examine different types of boundaries. Emotional boundaries involve protecting your emotional well-being by limiting how much of others' emotional distress you absorb. This doesn't mean being uncaring. But recognizing that you can't solve everyone's emotional problems, and that taking on others' emotions as your own often helps no one. Time boundaries involve protecting your time and energy by being selective about how you spend them. This might mean setting limits on volunteer commitments, availability for last-minute requests, or time spent helping any particular person. Financial boundaries involve protecting your financial resources by setting clear limits on what you're willing to give or lend. This might mean refusing to lend money to people who haven't repaid previous loans or setting limits on charitable contributions. Physical boundaries involve protecting your physical space, energy, and well-being. This might mean refusing requests that would require sacrificing sleep, health, or basic physical needs. Professional boundaries involve maintaining appropriate limits in work relationships. This might mean refusing to consistently work beyond your job description or setting limits on availability outside work hours. The key to implementing boundaries effectively is approaching them as expressions of wisdom rather than selfishness. This involves several important principles. Clarity. Boundaries need to be clear and specific rather than vague. Instead of hoping people will naturally respect your limits, you need to communicate them explicitly. Consistency. Boundaries only work if they're maintained consistently. If you set a limit but make exceptions whenever someone pushes back, you're training people that your boundaries aren't real. Compassion. Healthy boundaries can be set and maintained with kindness and empathy. You can acknowledge that your limits may disappoint others while still maintaining those limits. Self-compassion. You need to treat yourself with the same compassion you show others. This means recognizing that your needs matter, that your well-being is important, and that taking care of yourself isn't selfish, but necessary. Setting boundaries often triggers extinction bursts, temporary increases in the behavior you're trying to limit. When people are accustomed to unlimited access to your time and energy, they may initially push back harder when you start setting limits. This is normal and temporary. Remember that boundaries aren't punishments or attacks on others. They're simply information about what you're available for and what you're not. They allow you to be genuinely present and helpful in areas where you choose to engage, rather than being resentfully overcommitted across too many areas. The ultimate resolution of the goodness paradox isn't to become less good, but to become more wisely good. This transformation involves developing strategic goodness, the ability to express moral values in ways that actually achieve the outcomes you care about, rather than simply making you feel virtuous. This transformation begins with recognizing that good intentions aren't enough. The road to harmful outcomes is often paved with good intentions, not because intentions don't matter, but because intentions without wisdom, skill, and strategic thinking often miss their mark. The development of moral intelligence. Moral intelligence involves several key capabilities that transform naive goodness into effective goodness. The first is systems thinking, the ability to see how your actions ripple through complex networks of relationships and incentives. When someone asks for help, moral intelligence involves asking not just, how can I help this person feel better right now? But what are the long-term consequences of this help? Will it enable growth or prevent it? How will it affect my ability to help others? This doesn't mean becoming calculating or cold, but taking responsibility for the full impact of your actions rather than just immediate intentions. It means recognizing that sometimes the most caring thing you can do is refuse to help in ways that would ultimately be harmful. The second component is emotional regulation in service of values. Good people often make poor decisions because they can't tolerate the emotional discomfort that comes with making wise but difficult choices. They help not because helping is wise, but because not helping feels terrible. Developing moral intelligence means learning to tolerate the discomfort of disappointing others, watching people struggle when you could easily rescue them, or maintaining boundaries when others are upset. This emotional regulation isn't about becoming uncaring, but about caring so much about good outcomes that you're willing to endure temporary emotional discomfort. The third component is metacognitive awareness, the ability to observe and evaluate your own moral thinking. This involves regularly asking yourself, why am I really doing this? Am I helping because it's genuinely helpful or because it makes me feel good? Am I avoiding difficult conversations because they might be harmful or because I don't want to deal with conflict? Perhaps the most important aspect of transforming goodness into wisdom is learning to integrate strength with compassion. Many good people operate under the false assumption that these qualities are opposed, that being strong means being uncaring, or that being compassionate requires being weak. In reality, the most effective forms of goodness require both strength and compassion. Compassion without strength often becomes enabling or naive. Strength without compassion often becomes harsh or selfish. But strength with compassion creates the possibility for truly transformative help. This integration might look like setting firm boundaries while expressing genuine care, refusing to rescue someone from consequences while offering to support them in developing better decision-making skills, or saying no to inappropriate requests while saying yes to appropriate ones. Wise goodness requires adopting a long-term perspective that sometimes conflicts with immediate emotional impulses. This means asking not just, how can I reduce suffering right now, but how can I contribute to genuine flourishing over time? Sometimes reducing suffering in the short term actually increases it in the long term. Sometimes allowing people to struggle is the most caring thing you can do. Sometimes disappointing people in small ways prevents much larger disappointments later. This long-term perspective also involves recognizing that your own sustainability is crucial for long-term impact. A good person who burns out helps no one. A good person who maintains healthy boundaries can continue helping effectively for decades. The transformation from naive goodness to wise goodness isn't about becoming less caring or less committed to moral values. It's about becoming more effective at expressing those values in ways that actually create the outcomes you care about. The final stage in resolving the goodness paradox involves building resilient goodness, a form of moral commitment that can withstand the challenges and contradictions inherent in trying to be good in a complex world. The foundation of inner security resilient goodness begins with developing secure attachment to your own values and worth. Many good people derive their sense of self-worth primarily from external validation, from being seen as helpful, kind, or virtuous by others. This creates vulnerability because it makes their moral identity dependent on others' approval. When your goodness is motivated primarily by a need for approval or fear of being seen as selfish, it becomes easy for others to manipulate. They can threaten to withdraw approval or label you as uncaring if you don't meet their demands. Resilient goodness requires developing an internal sense of moral worth that doesn't depend entirely on external validation. This means being able to make difficult moral decisions even when others disapprove, maintaining boundaries even when others are upset, and trusting your own moral judgment even when it conflicts with social pressure. This internal security doesn't mean becoming arrogant or close to feedback. It means developing enough confidence in your own moral reasoning that you can consider others' perspectives without being overwhelmed by them. The practice of strategic compassion resilient goodness involves strategic compassion, the ability to express care in ways that actually promote others' well-being rather than simply making you feel good about yourself. Strategic compassion requires asking not just, how can I show that I care, but how can I care in ways that actually help? This might involve helping people develop skills rather than solving their problems, offering encouragement for positive changes rather than sympathy for self-destructive patterns, or providing resources for growth rather than rescue from consequences. Strategic compassion recognizes that sometimes the most caring thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's harmful patterns, even if that refusal causes short-term distress. The integration of multiple perspectives. Resilient goodness involves developing the ability to hold multiple perspectives simultaneously without becoming paralyzed by complexity. This means recognizing that most moral situations involve competing values and that perfect solutions rarely exist. When dealing with a family member who consistently makes poor financial decisions, you might simultaneously hold these perspectives: compassion for their struggles, recognition that repeated rescue prevents learning, awareness that watching them struggle is emotionally difficult, understanding that your own financial security matters, and knowledge that other family members are affected. Resilient goodness involves making decisions while acknowledging this complexity rather than waiting for situations to become simple. The cultivation of wise selfishness. One of the most important aspects of resilient goodness is learning wise selfishness, the recognition that taking care of your own needs isn't opposed to goodness, but essential for it. This involves understanding that your well-being, resources, and capabilities are tools for good that need to be maintained and protected. Wise selfishness might involve maintaining your physical and mental health so you can continue helping others effectively, protecting your financial resources so you can provide help when it's genuinely needed, developing your skills so you can offer more effective assistance, and nurturing relationships with people who support and reciprocate. This isn't selfishness in the narrow sense of only caring about yourself. It's the recognition that you are one of the resources available for good in the world, and that maintaining that resource is itself a moral responsibility. The long-term vision. Finally, resilient goodness requires maintaining a long-term vision of the kind of impact you want to have in the world. This vision helps you make difficult decisions in the moment by providing a larger context for understanding why those decisions matter. Your long-term vision might involve creating a family culture where people take responsibility for their actions, contributing to a workplace where high standards and mutual support coexist, or building a community where genuine help is available for those truly committed to growth. This vision helps you resist pressure to make decisions based solely on immediate emotional responses or social expectations. It helps you maintain perspective when others criticize your boundaries or question your refusal to help in ways that would be ultimately harmful. As we reach the end of our exploration, it's important to step back and consider what we've learned and how this understanding can transform not just individual lives, but our broader cultural approach to morality and virtue. The meta lesson. The most profound insight from our journey is that goodness itself isn't the problem. Naive goodness is. The solution isn't to become less moral or less caring, but to become more skillfully moral and more wisely caring. The goal isn't to protect yourself from goodness, but to develop a form of goodness that protects itself. This distinction is crucial because it preserves what's most valuable about moral commitment while addressing what makes that commitment vulnerable to exploitation and burnout. It suggests that the highest forms of virtue aren't necessarily the most self-sacrificing, but the most sustainable and effective. Throughout history, many of our greatest moral leaders demonstrated this integration of moral commitment with practical wisdom. They were deeply good people who also understood strategy, boundaries, and the importance of building sustainable movements rather than simply responding to immediate needs. The cultural implications. Understanding the goodness paradox has profound implications for how we think about virtue in our society. Much of our cultural messaging around goodness is not only incomplete, but potentially harmful. We celebrate extreme self-sacrifice without questioning whether that sacrifice actually achieves good outcomes. We praise people for helping without examining whether that help enables harmful dependency. This cultural framework doesn't just harm individual good people. It actually undermines the causes they care about. When good people burn out, become resentful, or get exploited, the net amount of good in the world decreases. When helping becomes enabling, problems persist rather than being solved. A more sophisticated cultural understanding of goodness would celebrate not just moral intention, but moral effectiveness. It would teach boundary setting as a virtue rather than a vice. It would recognize that sustainable goodness requires both compassion and strength, both generosity and wisdom. The ripple effects. When good people learn to express their goodness more wisely, the effects ripple outward in profound ways. They become more effective helpers, which means the people they help actually receive more benefit. They become better models of what healthy relationships look like. They create environments where accountability and support coexist, which encourages others to take more responsibility for their own lives. Perhaps most importantly, they demonstrate that it's possible to be deeply moral without being naive, to care deeply without enabling harmful behavior, and to maintain strong values without sacrificing personal well-being. The individual journey for you personally, understanding the goodness paradox, isn't just an intellectual exercise. It's an invitation to examine your own patterns of helping, giving, and moral commitment. It's an opportunity to ask yourself difficult questions. Are your acts of goodness actually achieving the outcomes you hope for? Or are they sometimes enabling the problems you're trying to solve? Are you maintaining healthy boundaries that allow you to help sustainably? Or are you gradually depleting your resources and energy? Are you helping others develop their own capabilities? Or are you creating dependency on your assistance? These questions aren't meant to make you feel guilty or to discourage moral commitment. They're meant to help you develop a more sophisticated and effective approach to expressing your values. The practical steps forward. If this exploration has resonated with you, here are some practical steps you can take to begin developing more resilient goodness. Start small with boundary setting. Choose one area where you consistently overgive and practice setting a reasonable limit. Notice the discomfort that comes with disappointing others, but don't let that discomfort override your commitment to sustainability. Develop a support system of people who understand both moral commitment and practical wisdom. Seek out friends, mentors, or communities that can provide perspective when you're struggling with difficult moral decisions. Practice strategic helping by asking more questions before offering assistance. Instead of immediately jumping in to solve problems, take time to understand whether your help will truly be beneficial or potentially enabling. Work on developing your own internal sense of worth that doesn't depend entirely on others' approval. This might involve therapy, spiritual practice, or simply regular self-reflection about your motivations and values. Begin viewing your own well-being as a moral responsibility rather than a selfish indulgence. Recognize that taking care of yourself isn't opposed to helping others. It's essential for helping others effectively. The broader vision. Ultimately, resolving the goodness paradox in your own life contributes to a larger transformation in how our society approaches virtue and moral commitment. Every person who learns to be wisely good rather than naively good becomes a model for others. Every workplace that develops cultures of healthy accountability becomes an example of what's possible. The goal isn't to create a world where people are less caring or less committed to moral values. The goal is to create a world where caring is more effective, where moral commitment is more sustainable, and where goodness actually achieves good outcomes. This transformation is urgent because many of our most pressing social problems require the sustained, wise effort of good people working together. These problems won't be solved by naive goodness that burns out quickly or enables harmful patterns. They require the kind of strategic, resilient goodness that can persist through setbacks and complexity. Your role in the solution. You have a unique role to play in this transformation. Whether you're someone who has struggled with the goodness paradox personally, someone who cares about the good people in your life, or someone who wants to contribute to solving larger social problems, understanding these dynamics gives you tools for more effective action. If you're a natural helper, you can begin practicing the skills of wise helping, discernment about when and how to help, boundary setting that protects your sustainability, and strategic compassion that actually promotes others' growth. If you're in a leadership position, you can begin creating cultures that support sustainable goodness, recognizing and protecting your most conscientious employees, building systems that don't depend on individual heroics, and rewarding wise helping rather than just self-sacrifice. If you're someone who has benefited from others' goodness, you can begin taking more responsibility for your own problems and growth, expressing genuine appreciation for help received, and looking for ways to contribute rather than just consume. The paradox resolved. As we conclude this exploration, it's worth reflecting on how understanding this paradox actually resolves it. The paradox exists because we've been operating with an incomplete understanding of what goodness really means. We've confused goodness with naivety, virtue with self-sacrifice, and helping with enabling. When we develop a more sophisticated understanding of goodness, one that includes wisdom, boundaries, and strategic thinking, the paradox dissolves. Goodness no longer becomes a weapon against you because wise goodness is inherently self-protecting. It no longer enables the problems it tries to solve because wise goodness distinguishes between helping and enabling. It no longer leads to burnout and resentment because wise goodness is sustainable. The resolution isn't to abandon goodness, but to mature it. It's to recognize that the highest forms of virtue aren't necessarily the most self-sacrificing, but the most effective at actually creating good outcomes in the world.